Welcome to EIPIP Meeting 29. The first item on the agenda is network upgrade process review and some proposed changes to the status of core EIP. This item we discussed in the previous meeting, and with the present model, I'm trying to propose some changes in the status of core EIP. So in the last meeting, I shared this diagram that is a link is provided in the agenda itself that suggests that if we can have the change of a status for mainnet phase and make the testing green light or public testnet to be in review or the last call status.
So basically, just to make sure I understand, when something is being tested, that it absolutely has to be in review or last call, right?
Right. So the last meeting, we discussed that generally the last call is suggested to be for 14 days only. So there was one correction that I recommended, that instead of having the last call for 14 days, we can mention it as a minimum of 14 days. That was point number one. And the point number two, when we are sending it on public testnet, then we mention it to be on the last call, and until it reaches on the public testnet, let it be in review status.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
And EIP will be considered final only if it is deployed on mainnet for the proposals which are actually being considered to be deployed on the mainnet via network upgrade, because the standardization process for EIP and network are different now. So there can be some core proposals who would be reaching to the final status but may not be ever being deployed on the mainnet. So we wanted to keep this on agenda for this meeting as well, so that people should know about it. And if anyone has any other thought, feel free to share.
Just to reiterate again, this is not an EIP issue. This is a core dev issue.
Right, but what I'm suggesting here is, like, if we are planning something and document it, we can at least reach out to the core dev or maybe the author of the EIP, suggesting that this is the process, and if we go by this, that would be like really helpful for everybody. Nobody can say that we weren't aware that the proposal is in this status and it is going in the upgrade, and something like that happened for one particular proposal.
Yeah, I do think that taking off my EIP editor hat, putting on a wannabe core dev hat, I think that anything that is proposed for mainnet should be in review by the time it gets there. Like, we don't want EIPs that are still under active development by their authors to be proposed. Like, you should be confident enough in your EIP that you think you're done, at least. You might not actually be done, but you think you're done before you bring it to the core devs and waste their time with it.
Right. So by bringing it to the core devs, do you mean the consider for inclusion phase? Because my understanding is, even if it is in draft for consider for inclusion, it must be in review when it is approved. If a core dev says that, okay, this is general consensus, we can think about it, then it should be in review. Or, I mean, it's fine.
I'm okay. I'm personally okay with CFI being in draft, mainly just because we don't want people to waste a huge amount of time before they get just like general consensus from the core devs saying, yes, this is an interesting thing to us. And to me, CFI is basically the core dev saying, yes, this is interesting to us. Go finish it now and come back to us when it's ready for us to look at for implementation.
Right.
And so for CFI, I'm okay with draft personally. Just, again, like if the core devs say, no, we're not interested, I don't want people to waste a huge amount of time getting something to review, which requires getting past MICA. which is a huge pain in the ass. If it's just going to be immediately rejected by the core devs, it would be nice if people could get just like there's a bunch of core EIPs, where people craft them and then they go through a huge amount of effort to get it past me, and then they finally get it past me, and then they take it to the core devs, and the core devs immediately just shoot it down and say, no, we're never doing that. And it's just a big waste of time for that author.
Right. And Tim has suggested here in the chat, CFI for draft, network upgrade for review, and testnet block chosen for the last call. Yes, that is exactly what we are planning here.
That sounds good to me. By the way, sorry about that. I actually can be here today. Everyone was very quick, so I can make it.
Thank you for joining, Hudson. Okay, so let's keep it for the notes taker. The suggestions here. CFI for draft, network upgrade for review, and testnet block chosen. That is actually the mainnet phase in the last call, and it will be marked as final only on when it is deployed on the mainnet. And we will share this information with the core dev as well. Hope there should not be any objection. Okay, moving on. The next item on the agenda is, should ERCs be moved to a separate repo? So there has been this discussion around EIPs and ERCs should be in different repos. We discussed it briefly in the previous meeting, and I saw some conversation on the Ethereum Discord channel as well. So maybe Light Client or Micah, if anyone would like to take a lead and talk more about it.
I can say something briefly. Hold on, I'm having an echo.
You're joined twice somehow. Oh, there you go. You're gone now.
Hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Ah, okay. I was still connected on my other device. Okay, so I posted on the Discord channel based on a conversation for the last EIP meeting. We kind of talked about how ERCs just don't fit very well within the EIP repository, and there's a lot of disjoint responsibilities over those EIPs. I personally feel like I'm not a very good person to be editing and reviewing a lot of the ERCs, and I feel like there's people in the community who would be really great at that, but they're really not suited very well for reviewing core IEPs. And for that reason and other reasons, we talked in the last meeting about what if we took the ERCs and we put them in their own separate repository. And I had just posted on Discord asking, like, what does it take? Whose approval do we need to get to make that happen? I'm happy to do the work. I don't think it's going to be too difficult. To me, the biggest question mark would be, there's a lot of permalinks out there that point to the GitHub pages. We can redirect the eeps.ethereum.org website. All the ERCs can be redirected to their correct page, but we can't redirect the GitHub page. My proposal to resolve that is just replace every ERC with a stub that just says this has been moved to the ERC repository. Here's the new link. And so that would just add an extra level of indirection for anyone trying to access it directly on GitHub. But I don't think that's like a showstopper.
What's the proposed numbering system?
I think the numbering system would, we'd have to have some way of, and the lowest tech thing I can think of is just a Google sheet that we share with editors, and that's going to increase the burden a little bit, because instead of just looking at the PR number, we would have to go look at the sheet to see the next available number. But I think that I don't want to do something where we like multiply ERCs by 10. I think that's just asking for problems in the future, but I think it's worth it in the long run just to make it a little bit harder to assign a number, because it's going to be a lot less work for core editors who don't have to review ERCs, and then we can really bring on more people to edit ERCs and actually build a kind of a community around just that aspect, because there's a lot of people who are only interested in the application level of Ethereum and they have no interest in EIPs at all.
I suppose once we create the if we migrate the EIPs into a similar file structure, then if someone tries to create a PR and create a file with a matching name, it'll immediately get flagged and blocked. So we don't even need to keep a separate document, I think. Right?
If the bot had like an overview of both repos.
No, I mean, like if we take ERC20, for example, and just copy it or cut it out of the EIP's repo, paste it in the ERC's repo,
Oh, sure.
there is now an ERC20 in that repo. And so if someone tries to create ERC20, it'll just immediately show up as, oh, they're deleting the old one, which is very obvious.
Sure. I'm more worried about assigning new numbers though, because there's no way to know if 3502 has been assigned as an ERC yet.
Right. So as soon as they, as soon as someone editor comes in and says, "Oh, your PR number is 20, so use ERC20." The user will then try to create ERC20, realize it's conflict, send a message to the editor saying, "Hey, there's a conflict. What should I do?" And the editor then just says, "Oh, use 19 instead," or whatever.
But if it's published in the ERC repo, there would be no corresponding file in the EIP repo.
Can we just add like some padding? Can we just say, I don't know, you add like 5,000 to the number? So if it's PR20, then your ERC, or I don't know, 5,000 might be too low, but
I just feel like we're not gonna, leave the EIP system in 5,000. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, that's only 5,000 EIPs away. That's
are you worried about there being an EIP 5000 and an ERC 5000? To me, that seems fine. We don't need them to be mutually exclusive.
I mean, if we don't need them to be mutually exclusive, why not start ERCs over? Is that what you're?
Yeah,
but then you're going to conflict with the current ERCs. I think if you take a number that's bigger than the last EIP right now, then you make sure that there's no conflict, right?
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yes, but the total number of ERCs that are actually like draft or higher is on the order of maybe hundreds, I think. I'll check while I talk, but I think that long term, you're going to end up with more simplicity if you just continue to use the PR numbering scheme and you just deal with those 100 or so conflicts if they come up. And keep in mind that there's a very good chance they won't come up because, every single PR increments that number, but only a small handful of those are actually new ERCs. And so I think that you'll just end up with a small number of conflicts. So when someone comes along and does PR20, if PR20 happens to be a new ERC, not someone updating an existing ERC, then they'd have a conflict, and then we do a one-off fix for that one. Say, I'll use 19 instead. 19's free.
I have a suggestion. I don't know how much it will be helpful, but I was wondering, not all PR number is an EIP. So what if we add an additional step for the ERCs, just asking them to create a pull request stating that I have I have created a pull request in ERC repository for whatever proposal he or she has, and just refer the pull request number here and use that as ERC number there. So in that way, there is never going to be a conflict and it will not disturb any of the process other than it will be an additional step for an author to just create one issue or pull request here at the EIP GitHub repository.
I would prefer that the EAP, if we were going to separate them, I would rather have it truly separated. But I do kind of like the idea where, we can artificially bump a repository up to a specific, issue or request number. And, theoretically, we could have a repo Ethereum / numbers. I don't know what you would call that, but you could just say if you're going to open an ERC or an EIP, you have to go open an issue to, claim a number. That kind of removes the burden from the editors. I don't really like the idea of allowing people to, start claiming single and double digit ERC numbers that were EIPs. And I don't really like the idea of having a ERC conflict with an EIP number. That to me just seems like we're asking for, especially because this is this is something that's going to be changed, and it's already difficult enough to convey changes in the EIP process to the broader community. And so people start seeing, oh wow, there is, EIP 3102 and there's ERC 3102. I think that's just asking for confusion.
Yeah, and like the precedent we've set is that ERCs are EIPs up to now. So changing that precedent would be a task. It's not impossible, but like maybe taking this in steps. So like the first step would be finding someone who even wants to be an ERC editor, and then have them start doing ERC editing in the main repo, and then getting the resources, meaning funding and people's time to split out the repo. That would be a whole different discussion. So I think, I guess all that to say, we're kind of getting into the weeds today when really the main decisions to be made are maybe if it's worth it to split it out in the first place, like from the repo, because I'm not convinced that they shouldn't all be in one repo. But I guess what's the benefit of splitting it out into two repos? Just like clarity?
One additional thought I had, since we're talking about splitting ERCs from core dev EIPs, is there's my understanding is that Mike and Light Client get harassed with a bunch of people trying to do stuff that isn't related to either one of those. And if we, and the key is we need an editor for ERCs, and maybe we could have a miscellaneous. So we have 3 different locations. We have a miscellaneous for all the other stuff. And we have, and maybe we could just say we want to push in that direction, and we want to find an editor for miscellaneous stuff, and we want to find an editor for ERCs, but EIPs are just for cores. Anyway, just a thought. Because I believe you should, instead of telling people what not to do, tell them a better thing to do. So if people, there's a lot of people that want to do that, if they had a place where they could put stuff, that would take some pressure off the editors, I would think.
Yeah, a lot of this is about taking pressure off the editors who aren't like either aren't equipped or don't want to handle ERCs, like they'd rather do EIPs. And so if that's one of the main goals, and sorry about the background noise, by the way, if that's one of the main goals, I don't know if we should split it out at all right now, or maybe just decide that later.
I think that it is more than just making things easier for editors. I also really think that it can help increase community participation. There's so few people in the Ethereum community who have the overview where they can understand both ERCs and core EIPs. It generally tends that people, are at DApp level developers, or they're kind of core level developers. And there's a lot of noise in the EIP repository with both of these things. And being an editor, having notifications on, seeing the noise, can be tough for me to keep up, even though this is like a responsibility that I signed up for. If I was just a community member who wanted to follow the latest and greatest core developments, or the latest and greatest, ERC developments, that would be hard. And I think that if we split it up, that would generally just allow this kind of like natural boundary that already exists for people to like really begin to be more involved in that process without actually having a role, just, tracking what's happening and, being a part of the governance process on both of those sides.
Oh, Micah, you just asked what point you got cut off. I didn't hear you from the beginning. So if someone interrupted you mid-sentence because you haven't talked. Oh, okay. I think you're on now.
I got disconnected like 5 minutes ago. So
I was gonna say you were unmuted, and so I was waiting for you to respond to something, but I didn't hear you talking.
I'll say it again. It sounds like you guys moved past it, but I'll say it just to get it out there. So there's only a few hundred, I would say, total EIPs, and a portion of that is ERCs. And so when it comes to numbering schemes, if we just use the PR number like we do with the EIPs, but use it for ERCs as well, except for the ERC repo, it will be very rare that we actually run into a conflict. And when we do, we can just handle that conflict individually. And I think overall that will be the least amount of work for ERC editors in general, just because conflicts are rare, and then when they happen, they're very easy to resolve. And that way the numbering scheme for the common case is very simple. It's just use the PR number like we do now.
So you're saying there will start with ERC1 and then skip 20?
Yeah, so we'll start with ERC1, and there's like a 99% chance we'll skip 20 naturally, because that's just how the numbering system works. It is not incrementally increasing. Like EIP, 20 exists and 55 exists, and nothing in between the two exists. And so yeah, we start with ERC1, and then there'd be an ERC, maybe 35, and maybe an ERC 72, assuming the pattern is similar to EIPs. And every now and then there'll be a conflict, but it'll be very rare. I'm guessing 1 or 2 total.
I think it's going to be confusing because generally people will associate lower number with earlier in the history of Ethereum. So if there's ERC5, they're going to think it came before ERC20, etc. So like if there's a standard that like improves on ERC20 or replaces ERC20, but it was ERC7, I just can see most people getting confused.
I would agree to that. So if we have to start this, like we should be starting from this point onwards, not going to the back number. That would be my first suggestion. And using the same, getting the PR number would be a better idea. It would not ever lead us to any kind of conflict because it's just an pull request that is there, an empty kind of just mentioning that there is a relevant ERC that people can go and refer to if they want to.
So the other option is we could just write a little bot that just churns through the first 5,000 issue numbers in the new GitHub repo.
The problem is then you still have this issue where you can end up with EIPs and ERCs with duplicate numbers. And so I really feel like they should be mutually exclusive.
Why?
I just think that we've already set this precedent that ERCs and EIPs are kind of very similar. They're in the same repos. They have different numbers. And it's going to be hard enough to try and tell everyone, hey, this is a totally different thing now. ERCs are their own thing. There's, maybe in the future they can have the numbers can conflict, but I just think in the beginning, I really don't think it's that much extra work. There's, I think there's 2 good ways to do it. We can either have a spreadsheet where an editor, spends 30 seconds and goes and puts the number in when they assign it, or we can have a canonical repo, Ethereum/numbers, where people can create an issue and they post the link to the issue and say, this is my EIP number because I went and this was the next number I got in the repository. And so I think there are good ways to solve this issue of, making them mutually exclusive. It just only puts a small amount of extra burden on the process, and it makes things so much simpler for people who are trying to follow it without knowing every detail.
So could maybe a way to do that be like you split the repo, but within the same actual GitHub repository. So you create 2 different top level folders, one for EIPs, one for ERCs, and then at the top level, you maintain a list of numbers. So like at least this way, yeah, they're always in sync.
The problem with that is you don't solve one of the bigger problems, which is email notifications. Like I'm currently subscribed to all the EIP's repo, so that way anytime someone comes in with a new PR, I notice it. And if we had them in one, then I still get all of the ERC ones, and on ERC editor still gets all the EIP ones.
Is there a way we could automate this list that like keep tracks of the different, it's almost like whenever there's a merged PR, you want to update the list with that number or something?
Yeah, I mean, you can set up like a GitHub action that fires a webhook anytime a PR is made, and you could even set it up to automatically do the numbering, so get the humans out of the numbering system. Of course, that requires engineering effort, and that is something we are very short on in this group.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we can have bots do this. This is a very simple thing to have written. Obviously, it has to be written. I don't think we have the time to specifically do it at this exact moment. But that's what I'm saying. I think that, starting with a spreadsheet and then eventually having someone go in and turn that into part of the merge bot, we would be back to the same level of effort required or less than today.
I don't know if GitHub repository supports with the help of label. If we start labeling it as ERC in the beginning, if somebody is creating a pull request, and that helps with the notification that you're receiving. I'm not sure of that, by the way.
doesn't help with the notification, unfortunately.
Yeah, so just to go over what we've kind of decided, we definitely want to split editorship into EIP versus ERC. We are heavily leaning, if not pretty much decided, they should be split out by repo. What we're stuck on is once they're split out by repo, how to do the numbering. Is that kind of a good summary?
I think so.
Okay, so I think a better option would be for people to come up with proposals and we make an issue in the EIPIP repo, or like, where's this stuff discussed? There's an EIPIP repo, yeah. So I can make an issue for that and put it in here. It's like Ethereum-cat-herder/EIPIP and GitHub. I think that's good, and then we can move on to other stuff unless someone has like final thoughts on this.
Only final thought is if we're going to do this for ERC, should we also do it for interface and network or not? Like ERCs are the biggest problem, but basically essentially the exact same problem exists for all the different categories. It's just much more muted for the other ones.
That was there in my mind. Thanks for putting it, Michael.
I think we should try out with ERCs and learn from that and then split it out further. Well, I don't know, maybe doing it all at once would work, but I don't think there's very many. How many interface and networking EIPs are there? I don't think there's that many that it would.
Yeah, and I think we want to keep the networking alongside the core EIPs because it is like the same set of folks who end up reviewing and implementing both.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree with that. Core and networking are very tightly related. Interface is a different set of people. So like MetaMask and basically all the wallet providers care a whole lot about the interface section, as do core developers, as do dApp developers. And so interface is like, it's a very appropriate name. It is the interface between all three layers. And they care about all three very much. So maybe that one pulling it out, just again, so we can have people don't have to get the core EIPs if they just care about interface stuff.
Sure. I think ERCs is a good place to start. The number of non-ERC or core EIPs is incredibly small.
I'm good with starting with ERC and see how it goes.
So, yeah, sorry.
Oh, Tim, were you talking? I think
So just to
sorry.
summarize it,
I
like
think
for
that
now,
was background noise.
I think we have to create an issue on EIPIP GitHub repository stating that we would like to start with ERC to be in a separate repository. And then maybe, I don't know if Alita just mentioned in the chat, if we can have some documentation of the requirement for both bot that we discussed, if that has to be done with the help of bot. And
cool. Oh, did anyone discuss about losing like historical history behind like the older EIPs and stuff? Would we just close all the previous PRs and issues and they'd still be in the EIP repo? Or would they be deleted?
Yeah, they would definitely still be there. I assume that the discussion threads for old ERCs, if they're pointed to issues, will probably just stay as issues in the EIP repository, and then over time there'll just be so few that are actually actively discussed.
Got it. Okay.
okay, so does it make sense to bring it back in the next meeting to discuss further on this topic? Do we keep it?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. So moving ahead, the next item on the agenda is progress on the EIP GitHub repo action bot. I believe Alita is working on that, and there is an issue for collecting some requirements for the bot. That is issue number 59 in the same repository. Alita, if you would like to provide some more update on it.
Sure. So right now, the bot is waiting on I forget who exactly, but basically we're waiting on transferring the exact bot to a Ethereum controlled repo. It's currently in a private repo. The actual merge bot, like where it's used on the main EIP repo, is not merged yet. I think that there's a small change that needs to be made, and we're still trying to figure out like manual stuff. For the EIP bot itself, from stuff we discussed last week, or last meeting, I have implemented like the testing framework for it, and then I have created a new issue for. Okay, so I have interfaced like the EIP merge bot in its own repo, so that way we can more easily like manage it. I have built the test framework, and I have created a issue for collecting information on more features required for the bot. I think that sums it up. Does anybody have any other comments or questions?
Great job. And I don't see it written anywhere how much the cat herders are paying for this. And I want that like down somewhere so we know how much to pay you for your work. Is that
Sure.
somewhere?
I think
Yeah,
it was 200,000.
Yeah, it was like $1 million, but you know. No. I actually created a funding request in the cat herders, and that references the video that like got me started on it, which was 7,000 USD.
Sounds
So,
perfect.
and then for future funding, like because I'm considering getting it up and running with like the features that were initially requested and like transferring over, including like the testing included in the 7,000. Just because I don't know, I want to make sure it's good. But any future like features and stuff, I will make. Like the idea behind the requirements document is to get everything in one place, so then we can create a thorough proposal for funding to get those in place as well. So
I
Sounds good to
believe
me.
there was an issue, not issue, actually, it was a response somewhere in the EIP GitHub repository itself, in which we kind of calculated like how much the work is required and how much should be the funding. Maybe I would share that link. But yes, that was somewhere around 7,000. So yeah, that's fine.
Other than that, do you need help getting it into a neutral repo like Ethereum?
yeah, if you could transfer over, and then well, actually I have two requests. Can I please be made a contributor to the EIP's repo, because it would be nice to be able to branch off of that, because I'm probably gonna be making changes to the bot once it's put in, like if I want to change the version or something on it, and then but yeah, so then we also need to transfer the current bot, which is at Alita.more or Alita-more EIP bot, which I can link. That one needs to be moved to an Ethereum controlled repo, which I would like to be made an admin on, so that way I can have some like ease of editing stuff.
That all sounds good to me. So just to be clear, we don't have contributor access on the EIP's repo. The three roles we have are read, write, and admin, because we are on an old GitHub plan that's cheaper for us. So would you need write permissions to read, clone, and push to the repository and manage issues and pull requests, or would you need admin to also change settings?
I don't know if I need admin.
Just right.
Yeah, just right.
Okay. Put your username in the Zoom chat if you're not on mobile, and I'll make you write permissions right now, and then message me on Discord, and we'll, in the next few days, get that transferred.
Sure.
Right. Awesome. Thank you.
Just one last comment from the candidate side, like do let us know whenever everything is done, like when bot is merged and when we have to make the payments. So just gives us a heads up on that.
I mean, I submitted the funding request. The bot is like, I guess, mostly done. I have some like polishing to do. I don't know if we want to wait for that to be done. I know I'm waiting on a final review from Micah. Like essentially it's kind of a continuous process. So I don't know if there's a clear line in the sand. Like in my opinion, it feels like the initial task was done and I'm just polishing right now. What do you think, or you all think?
My opinion would be after Micah's final review, if he says it's all good and there's no last minute fixes that were part of the initial set of either requirements or expectations, then I'd say we can pay out then, with the expectation that we don't pay anymore for you actually installing it. Cause I think that was part of the initial stuff, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, then yeah, that sounds good. After Micah gives the okay, I say we can fund it. What do you think, Micah?
The last I looked, I think we were waiting on that manual trigger that we found, getting that set up, and there was something else. I think it was mentioned in the issue. Are those two things set up now? Like, do we
So
have the ability to
manual
manually
trigger-
trigger? And what was the other
Yeah,
one?
Speaking of which, the manual trigger that you mentioned, I don't necessarily know if that's going to work. I'm trying to find a workaround for it. But
Lame. What's
yeah.
the problem? What's the gist of the problem? Like the one sentence version?
You can only run it on a branch, not a PR.
I think. Oh, but this particular bot needs to know the PR because it's going to merge. I see. Well, that's annoying. Okay, and do you remember what the other one was?
Let me read your message here.
I thought there
Oh,
was
yeah,
one other
there's
thing where.
Oh yeah, that the other one's done. It was talking about not referencing master. So yeah, the bot on its own separate repo has a versioning system, and it's using the version. So that's easy.
Okay, just send @mention me in the PR so it gets added to my inbox, which will cause me to then look at it, and I can do a final review.
Done. And then as far as the manual thing goes, I mean, there are definitely solutions. It's kind of hard to do that async, so maybe we can have a call or something like today or tomorrow.
Yeah, what I'd ultimately really like is a way that we can dip our feet in with it and migrate to it slowly. And so we can basically test to make sure it's doing what we think it should do. And then once we've validated that it's doing everything we think it should do in a production environment, then we flip the switch and turn the old one off, the new one on. I'm just a bit hesitant to have them both running, specifically because my current process is if I see the bot auto merge something, I completely ignore the email from GitHub. And so if the bot goes crazy and just auto merges everything, just as a pathological example, it may be a very long time before anyone notices.
Okay. I will implement some way to do manual, like the one. Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
What if we just have the bot set up to always run, but take away its ability to merge, and then just have it when it runs, it will just do like a green, red, or yellow in the CI section. Like you know how the CI at the bottom says green, red, or yellow. If we can just have it go green or red, then I'll at least see, did the bot think it wanted to merge, or did it think that it shouldn't merge? And then we can run that for like a week or two. And then if it looks like it's correctly going green and correctly going red at the appropriate times, then we'll flip the switch and actually enable merges. And if not, we can fix whatever bugs.
That sounds great to me.
Do we need any kind of documentation for this?
Any kind of what?
Documentation?
I mean, documentation is always nice, but at the same time, I would rather Lita spend her time on more useful tasks, given there's like going to be 3 people that actually ever use it.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just wondering, like, if it is needed at all.
So there is some documentation on the bot, like the code itself. I mean, it's well commented and everything, and I fully intend on doing like a full test suite for it, just because I mean I want it to be scalable. But like essentially, what kind of documentation are you referencing?
Oh no, I was just mentioning that if any kind of documentation is needed for people to refer, maybe in future if they have to fix anything or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bot itself is written in a way that's readable, with clear documentation on contributing. So I think that's good.
Oh, good. Okay, so in the sense of time, should we move ahead with next agenda if everyone is fine here? Okay, the next item is the EIP standardization process. So we had this PEEP and EIPIP meeting for EIP 1474 that was basically for RPC standards for Ethereum, JSON RPC standards, and two things were proposed in the meeting. One, like this standard, this proposal particularly is never going to achieve a final status because there is always going to be room for some improvement. So should it follow the normal EIP standardization process, or should it be granted some kind of special access, or maybe going with a special status, maybe living? Or there was another proposal of converting it to a meta EIP, because it would be kind of template for every client to implement in the way they want to, because not every client's implementation for JSON RPC standards are exactly the same. So it's difficult to document that in the proposal as an implementation section. And people were looking for thought of EIP editors on this, like how do they want to proceed with this particular proposal?
My personal preference is take this opportunity to try out a specification system closer to like what ETH2 has, where we have a repository that defines a specification, and then PRs to that repository is the change control process. And then when a PR is merged, the repository just shows the latest version. I feel like that works really well for documents that tend to live over time. That being said, I don't actually think the JSON RPC should be a living document at all. Like I very much think that when you deploy or when you standardize on something, you should really not be changing that standard on people. Like that's how you end up with the browser hell of circa year 2000 to 2015. Like standards should stick around and be very, very rigid, because that's what makes them useful, is their rigidity. So I have two minds on it. One, I think there are much better systems for living documents than the EIP process, and I encourage people to try them. And two, I don't actually think this is necessarily a good use case for a living document. And I know those two things conflict like 100%.
So the meta question here is like this proposal or proposals like this, should it be a part of EIP at all?
So JSON RPC specifically definitely needs to be spec'd out somewhere. Like it needs to be documented. Currently, it's documented in 5 different places, and it's documented poorly. And the people who own the documentation are not necessarily the people who care about the specification. And so it's not great, the current situation. 1474, if I remember correctly, tries to move all of it into an EIP kind of wholesale at once, which I have spoken out weekly on, like loosely against that, saying that it should really be multiple EIPs. Let me verify that 1474 is in fact the one I'm thinking of.
What's the canonical place for RPC standard right now?
Yeah, so I think if you're going to use the EIPs repo, I think the proper way to use the EIPs repo for this sort of thing would be to have each endpoint, each method, be a separate EIP. And then maybe an EIP for the overarching, this is how Ethereum JSON RPC is defined. I don't think trying to have this one monolithic EIP that then just mutates over time does anybody any good, because then you have a mutable standard, and mutable standards are not standards, so therefore they're not useful as a standard. Again, This is a good I still think this is a good opportunity though to try other things besides EIPs. Like there's basically, other than this EIP, there's no work that's been done historically, or very little, on standardizing interfaces. There's some, but not a whole lot. And so unlike core EIPs, moving out of the EIPs repo, I don't think would be hard. And so trying something new like ETH2 is doing with a GitHub repo that just has PRs against it, maybe is a better solution.
So we are now joined by Eric as well. So Eric, we were discussing about the proposal EIP.
Excellent timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Yes, that sounds like an interesting proposal.
How much of it did you catch?
I caught the very tail end, I think. So the suggestion that we may want to do something like ETH2 is doing and having a PR dedicated to the JSON RPC interface that accepts PRs.
Yeah, so basically just have a GitHub repo that contains the specification, and then the change control process would just be PRs against that repository. And that is the entire change control process. So a PR someone would submit it if they want to submit a change, gets reviewed by however many people. That PR lives for a reasonable amount of time to make sure there's time for people to give feedback on it. And then when the PR is merged, that's when it's final, or that's when it's standardized.
Well, I'll be damned if that's not the most pragmatic thing I've heard.
It's almost like we should do that for core development too.
I agree. PR should be used for everything.
So while talking about having it in form of PR and a repository, what are the thoughts on having it on eth1.o spec repository?
I'm fine with that. I think that's a great place for it to live, and this would be a good opportunity to try to kind of start using eth1.o specs repository for this exact sort of thing. And then maybe one day we can, then if this works successfully, I can dream at night about how one day the core dev change control process goes through the same system in the eth1.o specs repo.
Just imagine, we'll be putting PRs into the yellow paper for hard fork changes.
Well, hopefully it's worded better than the yellow paper.
So about the eth1.o specs, I was talking with Danny, I think yesterday or the day before. When the merge happens, those repos should merge too. And the eth2 specs repo is like much, I guess, more, much bigger. It has more content than the eth1 specs repo. So I suspect in the next, like, I don't know, 6 months or maybe a year, the eth1.o specs repo will probably get merged into the eth2 specs repo. And given like the scope of both, the eth1 would be the one that moves over. Yeah, so I just want to point that out. It might be kind of on its way out. And I mean, most things would still be useful in the, like, I guess it would be called the ETH specs repo at that point or whatever, but like the merged version of the ETH1 and ETH2 specs repos.
So perhaps if we do this, do it in the ETH2 specs repo and just deal with the fact that it's kind of a misnomer for 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and maybe we move the ETH1. Yeah, and moving the ETH1 specs repo is not long. I could probably do it in a day, but I think it's, getting.
Yeah, moving the PRs is the hard part. Like if we do this PR change control process, then
yeah,
like it's nice to have the PRs living in the right place from the beginning.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, that's what I meant. It's like almost we should move the ETH1 specs repo before we do this, right? But then.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how do the ETH2 devs feel about just renaming that repo like this week to ETH specs, and we just move everything over there over the next month? Like, do they feel very possessive of it right now?
So I guess my fear is like, or my perception of their fear is maybe, I don't know. I think Danny Ryan is the one who would want to ask about it. Like, I'm curious. I'm just looking at the commit history right now, and it's like Danny Ryan and Xiaowei are like 80% of the commits, and I guess Proto is like number 3, a distant third. But like, yeah, Xiaowei and Danny Ryan are really like the biggest committers. So I think just asking the two of them is probably a good approach.
Okay. Anyone want to volunteer to?
Yeah, I
approach
don't mind
them?
asking. I don't mind
Gauge
asking them.
interest?
I guess what I would be useful to know along with the ask is like, what are the specific changes we'd want to do, you know, because that'll be the hard part. If I tell them, can I move 5 markdown files over, I suspect they'll say yes. If I tell them, can we change how you handle
Right.
PRs, I suspect they'll say maybe. And this is the hard conversation, right?
Right. And that's why you just, you show up and say, oh, do you mind if I cut in front of you? And then you're holding like one thing, and as soon as
Yeah,
they say
exactly.
yes, and you're like, okay, bring over
Your
the
kid
cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think maybe the best way to go is like for us to, and us, I feel like I'm putting work on other people than myself right now, but like, to like kind of write down what we want and then bring all of that to them, rather than just like, can we merge the 2 repos, which is a bit disingenuous.
So short term, I think what I would imagining is the hard fork coordination for the application layer would move over. So London, Berlin, Shanghai, etc.
Yeah.
And then potentially, if everybody's in agreement on JSON RPC, we'd try to talk to the JSON RPC group to make sure they're also on board with something like this. And if so, then the other thing that would move over would be like basically the interface layer. So the application layer interface, which probably will also include the application consensus layer interfaces, like the ones that communicate back and forth between each other. Some of those are already in the 2 specs repo. So however they have it laid out, maybe we could kind of merge in with that. Again, assuming everybody is on board with this general idea. Eric, does this general idea sound good to you? I was not quite sure how much sarcasm there was in your statement earlier.
None whatsoever. I think this will be well received, because one of the main concerns that have been raised during the like JSON RPC groups meetings is that like particularly from the client teams, they're like, wait, you're saying that like we're going to be held up by the EIP process to like create or change methods? They're like, forget it. So I think they will be very receptive to this idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess the downside
no one
is
wants
like,
to go.
We talked a bit earlier about splitting up the EIP repo for notification spam. I feel like if we merge the ETH1 specs, ETH2 specs, and JSON RPC all together, then we are back, Xiaowei doesn't want to hear about new JSON RPC calls, and people in the JSON RPC working group don't want to hear about, deposit contract changes.
Yeah, that's very valid. It's a good point.
Yeah.
So fallback suggestion then would be, I don't know, Ethereum interface specs repo or something.
Yeah, I feel like there's, I don't know, maybe it makes sense to actually keep them separate for now and have, one for the JSON RPC, which is like the interface, ETH1 and ETH2, and then after the merge, we can merge ETH1 into ETH2, and then there won't be any more changes to ETH1 after, right? Like, or whatever changes there'll be across the merged clients, right? They won't be just across ETH1.
Okay. Only minor note on that is I would name it interface, not JSON RPC. At some point, we might bring in other protocols like gRPC if Artem gets his way, or we have REST for the consensus application layer. I think they use REST for their communication. And it feels like all those things should go in this repo. Like this is the repo for how various pieces of the system talk to each other, essentially. Yeah. Is what I'm imagining at least.
Yeah. So are we thinking that RPC methods that are implemented by, say, just wallets, like wallet at Ethereum chain and so on, would also go in this repo?
That is in my head. That's what I'm imagining, because that still is an interface which is between dApp and wallet, right? And you've got the interface between wallet and client. You've got the interface between application client and consensus client. You have the interface between consensus client and wallets. Like we could split each of those connections out, but I worry that we'll end up with people being confused, especially since there's some overlap. Like the DApp wallet and wallet clients, application client interfaces are very similar. Like they share a lot. And so splitting it apart into like one repo per like pair of things feels like it's not quite the right solution. And so that's why I'm thinking one repo for all of it. Open to other ideas though.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Okay, to conclude for this particular item, like we have to wait for some time, and maybe when we are getting more clarity on how to merge with the ETH1 and ETH2 spec as the Ethereum spec repository, then we will proceed with creating a pull request there and having that living there on that repository itself.
You're talking about for the ETH1 specs merge?
Yeah, because I understand that we are not planning to have the JSON RPC spec on the ETH1 spec repository, so it will be created on the ETH2 only, directly there.
No. No, so the current thinking per Tim's feedback a moment ago, we've pivoted very rapidly. The current thinking is now have a new repository that is just for interfaces, basically.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I got it now. I just messed with it. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so we have just a few more minutes left. Eric, do you have any more questions? Or
I don't at this point. I really appreciate that you guys decided to talk about this, and I think the solution sounds good.
Great, thank you for joining us. And we have just a couple of minutes left here for this particular call. I wanted to quickly check with Brent if he has any update on canonical source of EIP that he has been working on.
Okay, yeah, we have made a little bit of progress. We got one of our engineers got the Jekyll system running on his personal system, and now we're moving that to a public system. And once we get that up and running, then we'll have a staging area where we can stage proposed changes. So don't have a lot of time, but we're making some progress.
Sounds good. So I know many people have to drop now to join the other call, and we have almost hit the time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. See you all in next 2 weeks on April 7th. And the timing will be 1500 UTC. We'll be back on our usual timing. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, see you later.
Thanks.